Hello, Titans. We're back with another installment of Titan Table Talks. I am Cecil Chick, and I use pronouns she and her, and I serve as the Director of Engagement and Learning within the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs here at Cal State Fullerton. This dialogue is being brought to you in partnership with the Office of President, Alumni Engagement, and Government Relations. Before we start, here are a few logistical details for our program and tips to ensure that you are able to engage in today's dialogue. This event is broadcasted on Zoom webinar, so your cameras and microphones will be off the entire time. If you would like to engage with our panel or team behind the scenes, please use the Q&A function located in the bottom of the menu bar. This event is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DIEP YouTube channel with closed captioning available. At the very end of this dialogue, you will receive a feedback link to help us improve this program, as well as provide ideas for future events. Today, our panelists will be engaging in a dialogue about resiliency in the Native and Indigenous communities with the help of our moderator, Dr. Tunatino Sigera. But before we get to that, it is my pleasure to introduce Cal State Fullerton's president, Fran Verjee, who is here to give some opening remarks. President Verjee, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Cecil. It's great to see you always. Good morning, everybody. Happy Native American and Indigenous Peoples Month, and welcome to our Titan Table Talk, Resilience in Native American Communities. As most of you know, before our campus decided to read the Book of Unknown Americans as our first common read last year, the novel There, There by Tommy Orange was a very worthy finalist, and a lot of people read it. And looking back now more than 2 years after reading that book for me, I can say it was impactful and lastingly profound, probably as impactful and as profound as anything I've read in the past decade. Last year at this event, I even quoted what I think has become one of my favorite passages from the book, and I want to share that quote with you again, albeit through a little bit different lens. The quote is this: "If you were fortunate enough to be born into a family whose ancestors directly benefited from genocide, maybe you think that the more you don't know, the more innocent you can stay, which is a good incentive to not find out, not to look deeper, not to walk carefully around the sleeping tiger." You know, for more than 50 years, I have to tell you, I walk carefully around the sleeping tiger. Growing up in California public schools, I was never presented with, nor did I go looking for a book that underscored how my ancestors directly benefited from genocide, or a teacher who pushed me to look deeper into the horrors of American history in its reality, or a class that forced me to come to terms with our nation's original sin. In fact, in order for me to fully and actually recognize the trauma and the suffering upon which our country is founded, I ironically had to leave our country and go a long way away. You know, it was about 10 years ago now. Julie and I were in Rwanda visiting the Camp Kigali Memorial in the capital city of Kigali. That's where 10 Belgian UN peacekeepers were murdered at an attack that cleared the way for the beginning of the Rwandan genocide. And they built a memorial there where it happened. And on one of the bullet-ridden walls, I saw a plaque. It's actually more than a plaque. It's just a big covering of the wall. And it lists all the genocides in human history in order of death toll. And I saw the horrors that I knew so well from many of my history books growing up. There was the Armenian genocide, and it's 1 million victims. There was the Cambodian genocide, and it's 2 million victims. And of course, there was the Holocaust, and it's 6 million victims. But to my surprise, the Jewish Holocaust was not at the top of the list. Instead, it was the genocide of the estimated tens of millions of Native Americans and Indigenous peoples of North America who were systemically murdered from 1492 on. And I got to admit to you, I stood there and I stared at at America's place on that list in disbelief and denial. Sure, the atrocities of the Nazis and the Khmer Rouge and other what I think of as inherently evil empires, they belonged on that list. But the United States, the country my parents brought me to because of its tenets of freedom and justice for all, the nation that the world turns to often as the beacon of social justice and opportunity. And as I remember that day, 10 years ago. I remember specifically that my shock that we were not only on the list, but at the top, it was matched a little bit by my shame in not realizing it until I came to that moment. But there I was, finally awakening what Tommy Orange called the sleeping tiger, some 9,000 miles away from where we as a nation intentionally silenced that tiger a long time ago, with the myth that the imperialism that our nation is founded upon was somehow consensual rather than violent, with the history books and textbooks that portray the wiping out of a native tribes as accidental consequences of Western settlement rather than government-sponsored killing campaigns, and with the denial of America's role in perpetuating one of the deadliest genocides in human history. Hearing from Native people, I have learned that the pain and the anguish of this sleeping tiger, it transcends the lack of recognition of the genocide of their ancestors. As Deb Hutt, a Yuki tribeswoman, recently said about the genocide of her ancestors in the Round Valley in Northern California, what we lost was more than lives. And for people who are outside of Native and Indigenous communities, the sleeping tiger, it allows us to believe that our bounty has so much more to do with hard work and intelligence, and a little to do with abundance of unearned opportunity that comes with or at the expense of Native and American peoples. Or that the institutions that we attend or the employers that we work for are not somehow connected to that genocide somehow. Case in point, just recently, I learned in a New York Times article, of all places, that my law school, my alma mater, UC Hastings, whose prominent alumni include Vice President Kamala Harris, is named after a man who perpetuated this indigenous genocide. That he actually masterminded the deadliest of many of California militia campaigns designed to wipe out Native Californians in the Round and the Eden Valleys in Northern California. That he helped directly finance the killing of at least 283 Native American men, women, and children to take the land upon which my alma mater not only sits in the heart of San Francisco, but celebrates the name Hastings on everything from buildings to letterhead to my diploma. As tragic as this is, it's not anomalous in our nation, in our state, or in our region. Folks, we have to recognize this. It is who we are. But for too long, we have not listened to the truth. We have not bothered to recognize our historic or history, or even begin to try to make reparations to address it. In Hastings' case, the Round Valley massacres he orchestrated are not taught in California schools. To this day, I can't tell you in my time at Hastings at the law school that it was ever mentioned or talked about. To once again borrow from the words of Tommy Orange's There, all these stories that we have not been telling all this time, that's what we have not been listening to. That's a part of what we need to heal. So, what does telling and listening to these stories to stimulate healing look like? Well, at UC Hastings, it includes a number of measures that the institution is taking in an attempt to manifest restoration, or restorative justice, the allocation of space for a memorial in the main lobby of the administrative building, the creation of a program that provides members of all tribes in Round Valley pro bono legal help, the founding of a program focused on Indigenous law, and the board of the law school voting to authorize UC Hastings leadership to work with the state legislature and other stakeholders to change the law school's name. But what does it look like for us, for Cal State Fullerton, for the Titan community? No, we're not named after someone who sanctioned the killing of Native Californians. But our responsibility to both share stories that can lead to healing and eradicate inequities for Native and Indigenous communities, it's no less pressing. And so we are striving to live up to that responsibility in our efforts in our own way to awaken the sleeping tiger, to being more intentional and consistent in our acknowledgement that we are occupants of land that belongs to the Tongva and the Hachiman people, by recognizing that our history has led us to this present, to a time in which Native and Indigenous communities still and continue to suffer myriad inequities that were only exacerbated further by this pandemic. And by ensuring our students understand a bitter truth that I only learned by traveling half the way around the world to visit Rwanda, that the United States is far and away the most egregious perpetrator of genocide in our recent human history. While that is shameful for our past, it can't be erased. We as Titans, we can be a catalyst to bringing a long overdue awareness to that and a healing, not just 1 month out of the year with words, but every day of every month with intentional actions, such as the recent creation of new pipelines with tribal community colleges that we've established, the establishing of a Cal State Fullerton Native and Indigenous Student Success Advisory Board, and with events like this that highlight the voices of our Native American and Indigenous communities to better understand and appreciate the incredible gifts of leadership, courage, and resilience that they bring to our classrooms and to our communities. So I want to thank all of you for joining us on this journey, especially our moderator, VP Oseguera, our 3 esteemed panelists who you'll soon meet, and our tremendous team of diversity, inclusion, and equity programs and alumni relations and government and community relations. Thank you. I am so excited and inspired to listen to this panel.
Thank you so much, President Virgie, for sharing space with us today and also warming us up for the dialogue with your call to action. As I mentioned earlier, our conversation today will be moderated by Dr. Tinatson Oseguera. Dr. Oseguera serves as the Vice President for Student Affairs here at Cal State Fullerton. VP Oseguera, a first-generation college student, earned a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Vermont, as well as a doctoral degree in higher education administration from USC. VP Oseguera has used her career to create equitable access for underrepresented students. Her passion for students has led UCF to creating initiatives like the Tuffy's Basic Needs Resource Center and the Titans Dreamer Resource Center. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Tinatson Oseguera. Dr. O, take it away.
Thank you, Cecil. Very much appreciate being here in community today. Hello and welcome everyone to our Titan Table Talk on resiliency in the Native and Indigenous community. I am Dr. Tinatson Oseguera and I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be your moderator for today's conversation. I'm joined by a great panel of guests who are excited and ready to talk about our community. First is Tracy Stanhope. Tracy is a president of the American Indian Chamber of Commerce, both in California and nationally, as well as the president and creative director for AdPro. Tracy was also appointed and then elected as a tribal chair of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation located in Mayetta, Kansas. Thank you for joining us today, Tracy. Nicole Merton is next, and Nicole is a CSUF graduate who is a photographer that has put together an exhibit on murdered and missing Indigenous women. She was featured in the CSUF News for her senior project entitled Hear Our Voices, Our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Movement. Thank you for joining us today, Nicole. And finally, Rihanna Lipari. Rihanna is a teacher at Madera Technical Exploration Center who grew up in Karuk Native housing in the small town of Wairika, California. She's a double CSUF alumna, earning both her bachelor's and master's as a non-traditional student. So thank you, panel, for joining us today. Appreciate Nicole, Rihanna, and Tracy for being here. So let's talk a little bit about resiliency, right? Resiliency at its core really means the ability to withstand adversity and bounce back from difficult life events. And we want to get to know you just a little bit better. So I'll start off with a very general question of how has your story shaped how you do your work and engage with Native and Indigenous communities? And I'll start off with Tracy.
Well, thank you for that. That's a great question because of the fact that, after listening to Dr. Virgie and his opening remarks, they were very profound in the fact that I was raised by a very, very strong family. I'm half Native and half white, and I was raised by a family. My father was white, and my family was very much ingrained with our Native community because of the fact that my grandfather, who was Choctaw and went to boarding school and suffered the atrocities that were there, and never liked to talk about them. But he always said, never hold a chip on your shoulder. You're going to make your own way. And we were just discussing that. I'm here at the Indian Gaming Mid-Year Show out at Pechanga right now this morning, by the fact that, we cannot be people of this First Nations here in this country, native to our country, and not pull ourselves up by our own bootstrings. Now we have to continue to be resilient. This COVID pandemic has really put an amplifier on Native America in the lack of infrastructure and needs we've had in our community, and the impact of the deaths we've had on Native lands has just been horrific. And the fact that that we have to continue. I say my grandparents' ancestors, one walked the Trail of Tears for the Choctaws, and the other one walked the Trail of Tears on the Potawatomi side, which I'm an enrolled citizen of and former leader of. And we have to continue to prevail and pull our people up by ourselves and be resilient during these times, because it's so important, just so important that we continue to emerge as a people and be strong and not let the past dictate our future. And that's one of the biggest things we look at when we're doing our work in the American Indian Chamber and for our businesses. I'm also a business owner of 31 years. And my grandfather, who I said was Choctaw, had the language beaten out of him in school because they were not allowed to speak our native languages where he was taken for boarding school. He just kept reinforcing, you're going to be a business owner, Tracy. And he had other things for my siblings. I'm one of 5. And, sure enough, I became a business owner, but, which was remarkable in itself, in my opinion, but, I started with nothing. And talk about resilience. My family is very humble means, not that we were in destitution. Thank God, my parents came out on the relocation program from another reservation. My mom was born and raised on the Navajo reservation, actually, because my grandparents worked for the Navajo tribe, because they graduated from Haskell Indian College at the time, and it was during the Depression. And what they did was put educated natives and college educated in jobs on other reservations, because my family, we would have, if they would have stayed on Perry Ben's reservation, we would have not had enough to eat or live or whatever at the time. So, talk about resilience. I come from a long line of people that have really tried to improve our family and our people. And I was so thankful to be able to get back to my tribe when it was needed, by me becoming the chairwoman of the tribe and being able to help us in our business needs at the time. So this resiliency theme has been throughout. I've still been, I said at the luncheon the other day, the Native American Heritage Fund luncheon that we hosted, we are such benefits and with the wildest dreams of our ancestors, because here we are pulling everybody together, having a community where we did not have one in the business field, and growing our people in our own terms and on our own means, with the support of many great people like you folks here at Cal State Fullerton. My niece graduated from Cal State Fullerton in the 90s, so so she was a Titan. So go Titans! But it continues to this day. We were talking about it in the practice session earlier, just about the experiences that we still have as Native people when folks mean well, but yet they're condescending and patronizing. And even then, you have to be resilient in biting your tongue and saying, I know you mean well, but you're being a little off base here. So it's this theme of resiliency that you guys have come up with this year has really resonated in my life. I was a world-class swimmer. I swam in the first women's Division I championships, and there were really probably no other Native swimmers. And I hate to say I'm the first, because I hate that. I hate that we're still saying you're the first Native who did something. I'm sure hoping somebody came before me, and I'm hoping dozens more come after me in everything we do, that we're setting the stage, we're setting a standard, and people are able to continue to be resilient, because we have a lot of needs in our community. Infrastructure, thank God for Biden-Harris administration and this infrastructure bill. Hopefully we'll get people to have basic needs of water, electricity, gas service, sewers, you name it, especially the internet nowadays, because our kids were so left behind during COVID. So talk about being resilient. These poor children, with all this modern technology, no, they have to be super resilient and come and pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And our communities are here to help them in needs that you would think, living in an urban setting, going to a major university like Cal State Fullerton, you wouldn't hear of anymore. But yet we still face those trying times and those trying needs. So we're here. My story has been formed a lot by resiliency. I never thought about it by being resilient. Was just our mandate to do in our family and in our people. And I'm so thankful that I had that background. So that's my first answer.
Tracy, thank you for sharing your, a part of your story. It absolutely is woven through of who you are, which I think is very common for a lot of our Native and Indigenous folks. That's just, you're right, a part of our story. Nicole, would you like to share a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. So I'm Indigenous on my father's side. I was told I was Muscular Apache, but I'm still researching and finding that out. So okay, can you repeat the question as far as, so I can put it there?
No, you're totally fine. It's just really more about sharing a little bit of how your story, your personal story, has been shaped, and how you do your work and engage with Native and Indigenous communities.
Okay, so like a bit of background. So I had chosen to do this project for my last, I guess for like the senior project for the last year before I graduated. And I really wanted to get involved with my, Indigenous community. And I kind of just went through and looked at most of like I wouldn't say much of the crises, but like the issues that were happening within the community that I could like identify. And honestly, I connected with MMIW, not only because I'm a sexual assault survivor, but, because I'm also Indigenous, but I kind of felt like at that moment when I was reading all the, stories and everything else, and listening to the podcast, I kind of felt something for me that I had to do this. So I based my whole photography project on focusing on this crisis itself, which is the murdered and missing Indigenous women. And going through from this whole year of doing this, I did have different people coming up to me, and some were telling me I couldn't do it. Some were telling me that I should not, that I should stop. But the more women and even men and Two Spirits, the more that I communicated with them and we build bonds and all these different photo shoots that we did, like we built a bond. And so therefore I felt more of a connection. And with that, I didn't care what other people were saying. I felt like in order to get my thing out, that I could get their voices out at the same time. And with that, I could make a difference. And so therefore, all of their, I guess you could say their believing in me and us building our own community, basically, I was able to overcome these obstacles. And so now, honestly, it also changed me, gave me confidence. And I feel like, I am this ally for them, for their voices. And so now I take that whole, confidence and trust and everything. And for every single thing I do now, for all of my work, I invest all my energy and everything that I come from that into that, so that other people can experience what I'm experiencing. And so, I've also noticed within talking and communicating with with other women and Two Spirits and Indigenous, people, we can also touch bases on other crises and maybe figure things out. But yeah, I just feel like what I've had to go through, or what I'm going through, and how we're experiencing, it just built a better bond. And we honestly, like others were saying, we need to come together and hold each other up, because that's what it's going to take. That's what, so yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Nicole. I appreciate that. Absolutely. I think part of being in the, now as kind of Tracy mentioned and you echoed, is we have to help each other, and it's about really getting the community, and that's how we become not just resilient within each other, but as a community together. So I appreciate that. Rihanna, tell us a little bit about your story and how do your work and engage with Native and Indigenous communities?
So thank you for having me. My name is Rihanna LaPerry. I belong to the Karuk tribe in Northern California. It is up near the Oregon border. And I also am Shasta Indian. Unfortunately, that tribe is no longer federally recognized because we were murdered off to a point that we're no longer accepted by the government as a tribe because we are so few in my family. It's mostly my family members left over in the tribe that we're no longer recognized, which is a bummer because we're still here. But with that, I would say I'm an educator first and foremost, and I work with a lot of students where I'm at right now in Madera, California, with Native American students from Mexico, which while I know we have different experiences and they're definitely experiencing a much harsher adjustment right now, it has definitely pushed me to definitely recognize the issues and the hardships they're going through leaving their towns, because their stories are so shaking. Like, I have students who've experienced crime, and I've had to write notes as to why they should be let to stay in this country. And they're going through an amount of pressure and responsibility that no child should ever have. And that's especially heavily true for my Native American students, my Native Mexican, Native American tribe students, especially because they don't have the resources because their tribes still speak their languages and some of them do not know Spanish. So they come to our country and are very lost, and all they need is someone to help them and love them and let them know that they are a person who is valued in the education system. Because my K-12 experience was not that. My K-12 experience was riddled with a lot of Native Americans are drunks and welfare and a lot of the negative stereotypes. And I was hearing those from a very young age of like 9 years old. My first very clear experience was my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Smith. God rest her soul. I imagine she's not alive any longer, but she made it very clear that she did not like me. She made it very clear that students like me were not okay. I learned very early who could and could not be my friends because I lived in Native American housing. It's insane. And it's so sad that a lot of my students now are still experiencing that, because living in Central California, many of my students are starting to work at age 14 in the fields under a fake name, fake social security number, because they have these pressures to provide for their families. And it's that same pressure that many of our Native tribes have been feeling for such a long time. And this whole point of resiliency, my thing is always that Native Americans have never had a choice. It was either be resilient or continue to suffer the trauma of our ancestors. Like, there was no option. Like, a lot of people go, oh, you're so resilient and you've been through, these life experiences and single parenting and really poor medical care because I'm Native, like all these things. And I don't even think like the little bit I've gone through is like, it wasn't optional. It was never a choice. It was either I get out of this situation or I'm going to prove every racist in my K-12 experience right, that I was just going to be another Native American child on welfare, on drugs, and that I would have no future. But in my job, my whole point of my job and what I'm doing nowadays is reminding students that regardless of where you come from, there is always a way out. And I'm always going to be that person to see you. And I'm always going to be that person to never allow you to have an excuse not to be resilient. So if you ever want to meet some very resilient human beings, the Central California children coming out of the Native tribes of Mexico are much more of an inspiration than I think I would ever be on any day. So yeah, that's been my big impact.
Wow, Rihanna, thank you for sharing that. Deeply touched as one of those Indigenous and Native students from Mexico, myself, being part of the Puruchepa tribe from Michoacan, Ixtlan, and coming to the United States. Thank you for doing that work in that community, because you are correct. It's very much needed and similar in some ways and different to a lot of Native and First Peoples experience here in a different country and having to leave your homeland. So Thank you for your work. Wow, very, very, very powerful. And so I'll start with you, Nicole, as you kind of mentioned in terms of just being resilience, and that it's something that was just, you know, kind of do or perish because of the community. What do you want others who are part of the Native and Indigenous communities, or who do the work and serve Native and Indigenous communities, to know about the power of resiliency within the community? And then a second piece to that, what about those that don't do any work with Native and Indigenous community? What would you want them to know about working with this community and how to invest in a way that can really make a difference?
Well, sorry, I'm a little nervous. I believe that within working with Indigenous communities and people who aren't even doing that, honestly, I need to get research. I think they should, you know, look into certain things like the crises and try and come up with something that can offer help. And even if that's like for example, for me, like, you know, I can't do a whole bunch of things, but I know through my photography, I can be an ally, and I can put it out there somehow within my power to try and make a difference, but to also make sure that, you know, issues are being taken care of, or at least heard. Honestly, I would just say, be an ally, be out there, like, you know, stand up for everybody else, because, you know, yes, us as an Indigenous community, we have our voices, we can stand, but to also have allies, other people coming in from outside to come in and stand with us and to push us up and to, you know, just help us in different ways would just be absolutely amazing. And, you know, like I said, you know, we should, anybody, if you can do something, it doesn't even have to be like, you know, going and protesting or anything, but, you know, like, if you can, you know, if you paint, or if you do art, or if you do certain things, if you have an ability to get, you know, if you have some ability that you can, you know, put forth to help out, do it. Because everything will make a difference. Anything, you know, every little thing anybody does can make a voice, can make a little chip, can make a difference, can build a building block. So therefore, we can come out with a better outcome. But it also, yeah, I think for ones who are not Native, you know, and I'm not saying deep research, but, you know, follow up, read on certain issues, find issues that you think that, you know, that seem that you can make a difference for, and start focusing on that, you know. I'm not saying let's take, you know, all these different things, but, you know, for example, for me, you know, I chose one thing that I know that I bond with, and I'm now making it more huger than I ever could do. And, you know, it only takes just a little bit, but, you know, research, reach out to, you know, the Chamber of Commerce, and, you know, certain Indigenous groups, you know, just reach out there and just find information and, you know, do something, make a difference.
No, you're right. Thank you, Nicole, for that. I appreciate it. Rihanna, what are your thoughts about doing some work with both? What would you want those that are doing work with Native and Indigenous communities to know? And then likewise, those that aren't, what would you like for them to know?
I mean, for those people doing the work with Native and Indigenous communities right now, I first need people to be more real with themselves And as Tracy said earlier, we don't want sympathy. It's not about talking down to us like, oh, we can help you and show you how to live. And it's like, we're Native, we got it. Like, we've been doing this thing, we've kind of outlasted genocide, we got it, we promise. But it's like understanding your biases and understanding the realities of those stereotypes you might hold in your mind because of the media or social media, whatever it may be, and really address those biases within first. And you really have to do that. And even as someone who is Native and also white, and I'm white passing, right? So I have to address those biases within myself that I know exist, that have been institutionalized. And you have to address those first when you're doing those work. And those who think they aren't doing work with Indigenous communities are very unaware of the world. Because as we've said, right, people think Native American is just within the boundaries of the United States. Like, that's not real, and you cannot do that. You're like ruining a whole set of human beings' experiences, and you're denying their reality of what they faced. And so I think it's realizing that, like, everybody, whether you realize it or not, you're working with an Indigenous person, whether they've told you or not, you are. And some of the biggest ways people who think they are not working with the community can give back is really start to look into, like, where are you living? Whose lands are you living on? Are there ways to give back to those communities and help those communities thrive in ways that they may not have resources to right now? If you can help them with advocacy, if you can help them, I don't know, write letters and explain why pipelines and all these things are awful for them. Like, everyone has a part in making sure that the communities are healthy and doing well. And whether or not they realize it, they all need to do their part.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's very poignant, in particular around the, like, do not dismiss. And I think often it happens where folks think that, as we were talking in the pre-conversation, that somehow Native and Indigenous people don't exist anymore, that it's something from the past. And it's like, no, there are current living, breathing tribes, and Native people and Indigenous people, we are still here, right? They haven't yet erased us, and we're still here and thriving. And I think that often gets overlooked, or it gets mysticized, right? About, ooh, it's something, glamorous, or it's supposed to be this way. And you definitely see, unfortunately, still some of those stereotypes reinforced in the media. So great. Tracy, same question. What do you want Native and Indigenous folks to know about working in those communities? And likewise, what do you want folks that aren't doing that work to know?
Well, I wanted to get back, because I totally agree with what my fellow panelists have been saying, but I want to get back to one thing. And the one thing is treaty rights and how that affects the land that we're on in our especially unique relationship with the US government. And I have a magazine called Indigenous Post, and I totally support that there are Indigenous people all over this world that are being mistreated, and just the horrific things that have been happening at the southern border with the families being separated. That's unacceptable to me, the children being, so I support efforts to help people, and our people, all Indigenous people, need to look at that. However, my tribe has 50-something treaties with the US government where our land was taken and in exchange for rights. And there is a difference in our special and unique relationships between the tribes here in the United States as a boundaries. And I know that might be a touchy subject for some folks, but we cannot forget that. This is why we are recognized, and what we have to fight for to keep our reservation lands and our tribal lands and to regain those. When I was chair of my tribe, I went back and purchased a portion of our historic reservation that was illegally taken from us in Illinois. And so when we're talking about resiliency and how we work today, we need to get back to, our basics of having our lands, of having our culture and having our people and being respected here in the United States, and having that relationship continue throughout. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we don't receive free healthcare, we don't receive free education, we don't receive subsidies from the government, and we're not, just getting this and gaming and all this stuff because it wasn't warranted. It's been an exchange for treaty rights in our lands. And my tribe was almost exterminated, prairie banned, in the 1950s. This is modern history. And we had a woman, our first woman, I'm number 4 as woman chair of the tribe. you know, it's especially important for Native Americans here in the country. You know, I'm sorry, but I have to say this. I kind of like it being called Native American and Indigenous Peoples Month for the one reason is because we don't have our own month, and we need to protect that right, and we need to have that continue to happen. Not that I'm marginalizing anybody else, but we are the first people of this land. And you know, I've had conversations with folks, you know, especially in the Hispanic community who are from this land too, and it's like, well, this was our land before it was California. Sure, but you know whose land it was before it was Mexico? It was indigenous land. So let's get back to where, and Native people from here. And, you know, in my instance, we were a Great Lakes tribe that was forcibly removed and walked on a trail of tears down to Kansas, you know, and we lost hundreds and thousands of our tribal members in the process. So, you know, we need to be cognizant and respectful of that too, as we are as accepting and trying to help other indigenous people in the world, the Aborigines down in Australia. I mean, you can go on and on that people need help and respect and thoughtfulness and help with resiliency. You want to help us help ourselves, learn. I like the research portion, you know, read the book. There is a great book, and it's written by a guy from Oakland, you know, and so, or was in the Oakland community. You know, so there's a ton of things you can learn from. Just try to be respectful to all points in all positions. And for those tribes who don't have treaties, a lot of the California tribes do not have treaties. I'm respectful to you too, because you know what? You guys went through hell also. And it was a hell, and it was, as Dr. Virgie said, a Holocaust unlike any other in the history of Earth. You know, so I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but it's significant and needs to be remembered in this Native American Heritage Month, and who we are and what we do, and we need to be celebrated. You know, and I support other groups being celebrated at their times too. You know, so. Anyway, as a tribal leader who's fought for sovereignty for numbers of years and had to sit in the U.S. Capitol with a racist, sexist, and then he turned out to be a pedophile Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, it was quite a shocking education, and it's something that we continue to have to stand up for ourselves, and we can do it. I for one will be right there in the front of the line, as you know now, Dr. O. So there you go.
I love it, Tracy. I think, you know, those are really important points about how we think about the work. And in particular, as all of you have mentioned, doing some research and making sure that people who don't know the history, you know, as President Virgie mentioned, had to kind of go outside of the United States to realize and to know some of that, because it's just not taught in the schools. It's not taught in a lot of the history of this is what occurred, this is what happened. And so I think it's more important than ever before to continue to highlight that, and the Native and First Peoples here and I think people should know of California, you know, in terms of the 109 tribes that existed here before and that were here. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Kind of talking a little bit, getting back to the point of some of the resiliency. I'm going to ask how, you know, Tracy, you talked a little bit about it, but and thinking, how does your history impact your resiliency story? So how does your history impact your resiliency story of, you know, what you do, how you do it, and just that concept of how you think it has helped to shape you, but also your work, and what you're doing next, I guess, in some ways. So I'll start, Rihanna, with you. Would love to hear that piece of it.
Thank you. So my history, I feel like, is a little complicated. I feel like I've been through a lot in my life, which sounds weird, but my mom was actually adopted and didn't know our history until she was in her 30s. She had spoken to her mom on the phone, not knowing it was her mother at the time. And unfortunately, we did meet her birth family when I was 4 and finally got the start on figuring out who we really were. But unfortunately, her mom had passed prior to that. So we've been through a lot. So my grandpa, we met him, and I quickly gained 13 aunts and uncles and 23 cousins really quickly. And in that time, my mom got cancer. We ended up having to move into Native American housing. We were on welfare. It was kind of an unsafe living situation, not with family, but in terms of, unfortunately, the area I lived in, there was a lot of crime where I was living. It was like unsafe to go into a lot of people's houses because we had to watch out for, unfortunately, some unsafe, let's just leave it at unsafe situations. And so with that, it was like a drastic change, right? I go from living in Southern California where like I'm going to school with everybody. And then suddenly I'm in a classroom with all white students and I am the only Native American child. And my teacher knows it because they know where I live. Right? Like you can't mistake an tucka tucka tea, like that's not English. Like you're not going to mistake where I came from. And that's where like it really began to change kind of like my experiences in life and really realizing like, wow, people really don't like me. And for a good chunk of my K-12, I actually kind of denied my heritage as much as I could and would simply claim my Italian side. Because I knew that would mean I would have less friends. That means I knew teachers would treat me different. I knew that meant I would be the other all the time. And that experience was like very negative. And I remember so strongly my 12th grade year, I had a teacher, I had my first D ever, and he made it very clear he did not like Native American people and looked me in the face one day and told me Pocahontas was a whore. And my mother called the school and they asked if I had a problem with male teachers. Right? Not that he was the problem, right? Mind you, this man ended up going on to commit armed robbery my senior year, and that tells you the quality of human being that person was. But my district did not protect, like Wairika, California, I don't care, I'll call it out to this day, does not protect their Native students. They do not protect them. They do not create a safe learning space for them. And that definitely created such like a hard place for me to live and exist because I wanted to deny so hardly who I was. But doing that, I kind of lost a lot of my culture along the way. And I know that. And I'm having to relearn that culture and regain all of that because of my experiences in my education. It wasn't until I got to Cal State Fullerton and I had Dr. Henning make me go through my multicultural class where I really started to address the trauma and issues I had with education and how poorly I was treated as a human being. And like becoming a single mom and going through Cal State Fullerton and often not knowing, was I going to be homeless next month? Was I going to have food on the table? A lot of the programs didn't exist that now exist at Cal State Fullerton. I had to constantly worry, like as a single mom, I have no car, I have to walk to the bus. I don't know if I'm going to get stabbed in the bad area of Anaheim. Like those are the things that pushed me to be who I was. And that has definitely impacted why I am the educator I am. And if you saw me in my classroom, you would not I speak like my students. I treat them like the human beings they are. And I think that has been the biggest impact, is making sure that I'm never judging anybody based on their past history, whether it be their ethnicity, their attendance records, their discipline records. It's making sure that no matter what, you are treating a person like a human being and never devaluing a single part of who they are. And so I think that history has definitely pushed me to want to constantly make sure that no matter what student or what person walks through my life, that I always make sure that they are made to feel like every part of them, including whatever part media has made to seem negative, whether you're a person of color, whether you're Native, whatever it is, it has really pushed me to make sure I recognize everyone for who they are and the amazing people they are, because so often we are stuck judging people prior to knowing who they are. And we're losing out on knowing such great things about different cultures, about different people, and just the experiences people can have as humans. So it has definitely pushed. And in the future of my life, I want to get my PhD, and I don't know what comes next, but I definitely want to keep pushing and keep kind of exploring what comes next and how to help other people be the most successful they can within my community and all communities.
Thank you, Rihanna. I totally wholeheartedly support you getting your doctorate, your PhD. Do it. Lots of we need good people. In particular, as you say, I think sometimes if our students can see it, they will become it. And so, you know, you as a role model to all those young students and to others, to have someone like yourself be out there, it's a great role model. So keep doing it. We'll cheer you on. It's good. So thank you for sharing that. Tracy, same question to you. You talked about resiliency, and that's just like, man, that is just who you are, core through and through. But how, in terms of the future, what are you looking at for you, and what you want to do, and how it's affected, where you are at this point?
Well, I have been really blessed because, we've been raised in our culture, and I was always made aware of where we came from and how we got here, and look at the positive side of life instead of focusing on the traumas of my ancestors, which I don't really. It's an interesting process because I know what they came from, and I know the troubles they have were related to that upbringing, even though they really focused on us as they're, the next generation to do better. In the future, we're still in the same grind. This is not over. And we continue to be, we were discussing it today or yesterday at our conference here. We always face adversity from those who want to take from our, keep us in the bottom of the crab bucket. And that's why I had to bring up our treaty rights and why we have this recognition with the U.S. government as the first peoples of this land here. And it's important that we continue to focus on that, not so as much as we get what we deserve, but that respect is provided to our people. It's never ending, and I hate to be negative in that standpoint. We're always going to have to grind it out. We're always going to have to help our other fellow Native tribes and Native people bring themselves, and Indigenous people bring themselves up by their bootstrings too. And until we continue to do that and get, let's face it, white people run this country, and that's fine and dandy. But until we have a Native or an Indigenous person on the boards of all major corporations at the highest levels of the government processes and engage, a lot of people say, well, bad on Wells Fargo or bad on Bank of America or the World Bank. I get it. But until we're sitting at the World Bank and we can change how they treat Indigenous people around this world, then we're not going to be anywhere, because we have to have money, we have to have currency to live, and some type of way to provide compensation to other people in exchange for goods and services. So in the future, we want to get people in places of power, on commissions, at universities. Look at you, Dr. O. You're able to help facilitate discussions like this. This is amazing what you folks are doing to educate the next gen of students on interesting issues from all over the world that affect people, and that's phenomenal. And the students here should be appreciative of it, whether they agree with what we're saying or not. It's our opinion and our history and our education and everything else. So the work is not stopping. We're going to continue to plow forward and buy Indian.
I love that. That's a great plug. I love it. Nicole, tell us, just a little bit more, I think, in particular, your story of why you chose to do the project and around photography that you did, the resiliency that you kind of went through as you were doing the project and that you saw from other folks initially when you shared a little bit about your story is really good. But I wonder, what do you see next for that? Because this is still an ongoing issue of, the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it's been highlighted a little bit more, I would say, in the media recently. So it's gotten some attention, but it's still happening. And I think just beyond bringing light to it, what do you see as some of the next steps of that? How can we do something beyond just, shine the light, right?
Well, a little history. Sorry. I'll kind of just continue on. So I didn't really know about my my history a lot until I was about, I want to say about 30. I didn't know I was Indigenous on my father's side. And my mom told me once, what the tribe was, what she thought it was, which is Mascalero Apache. So I had to get a blood test done. With that, I connected with one of my uncles who is no longer here, but he had also said that I was Mascalero Apache. But I'm still researching in that and making sure everything's going right. But I do still hold all, I still do the ceremonies and everything like that. And I try to, engulf myself with all sorts of the history, the stories, all the traditions. I want to pass that down to my children because I have 2 little boys. Those 2 little boys are kind of another reason why I pushed to do this project so well, to do it, because not only is it about murdered and missing Indigenous women, but there's children as little and as small, I'm sorry, I'm gonna get emotional, as 10 years old. 10, and not even that, like I think the most youngest one to ever be murdered was under a year old. And just from the emotion of hearing that is what makes me want to make a difference. And so even though I get stopped and people tell me, I understand some people from the tribes were like, no, we don't want to bring up this issue. And I understand reasons why, because this is a very, very touchy subject. But then there was also non-natives who were just basically telling me to my face that if you're not white and you're not blonde, you don't need to be on here. You don't need to be doing that. This is not something you need to bring an issue to. And I was angered because, how ignorant can you be to even say that doesn't even make a difference? It does not, hearing the numbers of women and children and even men, even Indigenous men and Two-Spirits, the death toll is just for the women alone, it was 5,712 in 2016. And since the pandemic, it has risen like 3 times that. And I feel that, yes, we do need to shine light, but in order to make a bigger difference, we need to, like how some of my other panelists were saying, we need to get people in the offices and, he start putting things together, certain acts like the Savannah Act, to make this more effective and more into everything. We need to have more Indigenous, people just in office altogether, and in businesses and offices and White House, everything. As far as how this is going to go forward for me, I am looking forward to starting my master's. And I am continuing my series, but I'm going to open it more to Two-Spirits as well as Indigenous men, because they also have stories. There are so many things that you can read and hear in the podcasts, and that's why it's so, I'm gonna start crying. It's so emotional for me, because every time I hear these people's voices, their stories, the things that happen to them, I mean, it is incredible how these people go through these things and they're still standing strong. So this is why it's my point to make a difference and to record these things so I can have their voices so they can be heard, because it's insane. And so, sorry, I'm getting off subject here, but yeah, it's, my future is putting more of this together and hopefully putting together a book, or I do have some exhibits already up now that people can see and read these stories. I mean, and if you don't feel something, I don't understand why you wouldn't. Yeah, for me, I want to continue having these voices. I'm continuing to make sure that I can do all that I can do to make that difference. So yeah, that's my future.
I appreciate that, Nicole. Thank you for sharing that. It's a theme that, all 3 of you share so strongly about the resiliency in the community that exists, personal resiliency, but also just even in the future. None of you said, well, I'm done. I'm gonna rest and call it a day. I mean, all three of you have said, this is what I'm going to keep doing. We're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. We need people, or we need Native and Indigenous, Native American people on boards and all levels of government. So I look forward to seeing you all run for something, and I will support any campaigns for any of the three of you to run for anything that we have, school boards. Lord knows we need good folks in school boards, all the way to the White House. So anytime, please, you'll have some good Cal State Fullerton folks supporting you in any of your endeavors. I know I'm also cognizant of time, but and I want to get to some questions that folks may have. But before we do that, I just want to give you one more opportunity to just, share any wisdom that you might have for folks that are here listening to today's table talk, and what message, if anything, that you'd want them to walk away with, whether it's about your story, about resiliency, and what you want folks to know. So I'll start in the same order that we started with, but Tracy.
Well, thank you. I think what I would want to share with folks is that, respect for fellow human beings and people of all kinds, humankind. I think that's been so missing, and I'm going to get political here in the last administration. Whether you like their financial policies or economic policies or healthcare policies, it was all, especially the education policy, it was all devoid of humankind and compassion. And I think, as a people, we can have differences in our opinions and in our values possibly, but be human, be kind. I have very strong opinions about my people and Indigenous communities and Native communities and so forth. But, I'll sit there and listen to you. I might not agree with you and I might not like what you're saying, but I'm going to treat you with respect. And I asked the same because I think in our practice session we were laughing about some things, and one of them was how we get patronized and how we're people talk to us very condescending because you're a Native, you must be lesser than or poor, you're just coming out of your teepee, and we're gonna teach you how to fish or whatever, and my people kill buffalo and everything, so I think we can handle certain things, but we do need help. We need support, and but we're here to do it, and if we're going to own it, we're going to have to do it. But no one's an island. You need partners, and you need compassion, and you need respect, and you need people to look back at you and say, yeah, I like you, and or I don't agree with you, but I'm still going to make sure that there's a chicken in your pot and a roof over your head, and you've got basic needs covered. And that's what's missing in this country, I think, in the last few years. And that's why I really respect what you're doing here at Cal State Fullerton in your diversity programs and so forth to help everybody discuss the situation and help themselves, because education, of course, is so important. And as you know, Dr. O, we gave away a bunch of scholarships this past week I laugh to this day, our first time in our chamber as we've grown 25 years ago, our first scholarship was one girl for $500, and we were like, yay, we got $500 to give away, and this past week we gave away 22,000, which we're like, yeah, that's our best one. But anyway, not just to pat ourselves on the back, but to pat ourselves on the back. This is about, just making everybody well-rounded and trying to give back, and yet, make a couple of bucks for us too. And that's important because we have to have profit to help our people and to help our families and to get people out of this poor housing that I'm touched, Rihanna. I hear you, and I know everybody's has family members that have gone through that. And it's sad to say in this day and age, you're a young lady, and to hear these stories over and over again and to see them at my own communities, we got to do better, and we can. But we need people's help and support, compassion, but respect too.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that. I think it all starts with the respect of individuals and humans, and that's an important piece of it. Nicole, what would you want to share as a final piece with folks here today?
I agree with Tracy. Compassion, lots of compassion, understanding. And I'm not saying don't have, I mean, empathy is good, but don't also feel sorry for them. Don't be like, oh, you know, it's okay, you know. No, because that's not about what that is. But I do ask that when coming in, and if you're gonna try and make a difference, or if you don't want to know things, you know, have an open mind when you come in. Don't be one-sided, you know, listen to both sides, because that's what I've learned. Going into this project, I had to have a mindset of everything, because when I first went in, my, you know, yes, you know, I have my Indigenous side, but in the beginning of this project, I was one-minded, was like, oh, you know, I'm gonna do it this way. But then learning from these communities and all these women and men that I've like spoke with, like elders, and everybody share their knowledge. Like I now have to be too, you know, open-minded for everything. I have to look on both sides. Because I mean, I'm not fully Native American, I'm also you know, Caucasian. So again, I have to come at both sides, and I have to reason now. Like now I look at everything differently, and I have to see, okay, I understand where they're coming from, but from this Indigenous side, I also understand where they're coming from. And so I myself have to learn that. And I think moving forward, you have to come in with an open mind when wanting to do, you know, work with or help out or anything. And like Tracy said, you know, as long as, you know, you don't always have to agree, but as long as you're willing to, you know, make sure that they, you know, have a helping hand, that's all that matters. So.
Thank you for that, Nicole. Appreciate it. Rihanna.
So I would also add to what Tracy said, and what I took away was we need a lot more unity, and that is as a whole country, as a whole Native community, because there are still a lot of institutionalized ideologies that even some Native communities hold on to about blood quantums and you're not enough Native, and really we don't have time for that. Like, we don't have time for like weird institutions set up by the United States government to determine whether or not you're enough Native for me to support you or not. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And so that's a really big thing, is like, we need unity, and we need to quit looking at things like, oh, you're not enough of this, or you're just a little bit that. It's like, we need to value each other as a people, and that we are a whole people. And the bigger thing with the way the country needs to support in the way that we have not been getting, especially with a lot of the pipelines getting put in regardless of treaties, or whole communities being like destroyed, and housing, and you know what I mean? Even the most basic things, right? We have these reservations out there that don't even have power, but then people are still trying to take even that land away from them. Like, how are you going to put them in the worst possible situation and yet still want that land back from them? Like, we need more people to realize that we need support from every which way we can possibly get. And like Tracy said, yeah, we do need to make a little bit of money, right? Because at the end of the day, the poorer communities of our tribes do need that financial support, right? Like, I was used to growing up in Native American housing, and sure, the elders and whoever, we would take care of each other because we were one people. And, oh, you don't have cheese, I got it. Or you don't have, you know what I mean? It was just, we traded with each other for anything under the sun that you could need for food, right? And we've lost that because we don't necessarily even have the resources to keep supporting each other that way. So whether it's you are supporting financially, whether you're supporting our political future runs, whether it is you're just making sure whatever institution you work for, that you're still pressing and holding the voice of that Native American community in your head, and remembering that every decision that is made within companies and everything impacts every culture in a different way, and that we need to value that. We need to make sure that we are not just continuing that destruction of our community.
Thank you. So powerful. With all of you. And I love the message of unity and working together, because I think that's most important. And we need, you've all said it, we need that more than ever. We need that now. Some questions came in from the audience. They clearly are riveted and want to know a little bit more about your stories, but a couple of ones that came in, there's a question in particular around healthcare and infrastructure. And so I'll ask it, and then whoever wants to answer it, in particular around COVID, expose some challenges in work and healthcare. But we also know that some of the Native communities have the highest vaccination rates. I know I read an article talking about the Navajo Nation and how they have the highest rate of vaccination and the lowest amount of cases. But this person is wondering, is there still concerns about the risk COVID poses to communities, obviously in particular Native and Indigenous communities, and really would like to know how the private sector can help improve healthcare outcomes for Native and Indigenous communities. So I don't know, I think Tracy, you may want to take that question for some of your involvement that you do.
Well, that's a great question. And I've been speaking to healthcare groups all over the country, actually. Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm on the State Healthcare Commission for Diversity. I'm a commissioner on that. But the most important thing is, one, there's still a great challenge in Indian country for healthcare overall. COVID, it's been horrible. The impact on our community, even people in the urban areas have been affected and passed on from it. I mean, 750,000 people in this country have passed on from COVID. And I think a lot of it could have been helped earlier if we had gotten onto this a lot quicker than what we did. And the issue that we had in Indian country when we first started was, number one, we weren't included in the CARES Act to begin with when it was going through the last, the first rendition. And thank God for Nancy Pelosi and others in this country for fighting for Indigenous people, because we had to scrape and borrow and call in all the chips, because that act was going through without any funding. I don't know how many people know this, for Indian country, until it got stopped by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. So we had to really get healthcare into that factor into that bill, because no vaccines were going out to Indian country before that happened. So we had to really scramble to get into that. No funds were going out to Indian country before that happened. And, it was really very much a big battle, unfortunately, in this country to make sure that Native American people and our tribal people were included. So with that, having said that, healthcare on our reservations has been, in tribal lands, has been an issue forever. So for all those of you who think we get free healthcare and everything, we do get some healthcare. I opened a beautiful clinic when I was chairwoman at my tribe, using tribal dollars and IHS dollars, Indian Health Service dollars. And, it's still not adequate. It's beautiful. We do a lot better, but it only goes to a certain level of care that's provided to our people. And you must realize we're out in such a rural community, even the neighbors who are non-Native and off reservation, they don't have good health care. So, factor that in. And the other thing that happened out in Indian country with COVID, and I was called back for an emergency meeting because I sit on our economic development, our LLC business board, we ran out of food. We ran out of basic food, even though our casino opened, and we have a casino, it's very nice, but we're a large tribe, so we're not large per cap based. And what per cap is in dividends that are given to tribal members from the business, which I wholeheartedly believe in, because we need to operate as a business and to grow our people. And a lot of people have problems with this or concerns about this. But if you have stock in Johnson & Johnson, you're getting a dividend from that stock and that ownership in that business. So it's a similar thing, and it helps our people have more choice and have learn how to handle funds and give back money elsewhere and so forth. But we got called back for an emergency meeting because we ran out of food in the area, and there was nowhere else to get food for people. And we opened up our casino, and we gave out all the perishable food right to begin with, because we had to shut down. But there's no reason that the fruits and the vegetables and everything else that was perishable should go to waste. So we gave it out, and then a few months later, we're out of food. There's no meat. There's no and so we had to regroup and open up our casino as a commissary and try to get foods, canned foods in and so forth. So there's a huge issue. So how can the private sector help? you know, we're benefits out here in the of Obamacare in the Covered California program. And what that allowed us to do was to buy private insurance through the exchange Covered California for American Indian and Alaska Natives, and they offset the cost of that with IHS dollars. And so that was a huge thing for people off reservation, for people even on reservations who want to afford buying their own insurance and get better healthcare and get more choices for healthcare and get hospitalization and so forth. So it's a very complex issue, but as a former tribal leader and someone who still works in that industry somewhat, because I'm still involved with the leadership of my tribe in the business sense, this is something that we need to get taken care of. And this is something that we need to make sure that we're included in everything. That's why it's important that we get people everywhere and in every position to say, hey, wait a minute, you forgot about Native American people and in the American Indian Alaska Native communities. And I can't tell you how many times I sit in a big corporation in a big meeting and I'm the Indian person and I will be the token Indian. I love being there to hear this, but they don't even put us on a chart. Oh, you know, they'll go through, they'll have the Hispanics and the Blacks and the Asians and as my friend over there said, the Two Spirits and everybody else, and there's no Native American numbers. It's like, we don't even exist. You know, it's like, if you don't exist on the charts and the metrics, then you don't exist in that planning. So, you know, so that's very important that we continue. So I can go on this forever, Dr. O, but I'm gonna let the other folks speak. So thank you.
I appreciate it. We do have some more questions coming in. So one that I'm looking through them as they come in, but one that I think is really good is this person says, it sounds like you all have experience in challenging the status quo. It's so refreshing to see a panel of Indigenous women talking about resiliency. But what are some tips and suggestions that you have in order to fight the status quo effectively? And so, Rihanna, I'll start with you.
Oh man, that one's hard. I think a lot of it was built in by my mom, honestly, who told me that in my life, I should not expect to rely on a single human being ever. And that I have to make everything in my life happen for me. And I've taken that along the way. Whereas instead of like seeing all my challenges as like, oh, poor me, awful, right? Like I had really poor medical care on that last question. I had really poor medical care. I ended up having to have a hip replacement in my 20s because my healthcare in Northern California was so poor that I walked on a dislocated hip for 7 months because medical people generally don't listen to Native American people. Even right now, I'm technically on disability right now because people haven't been listening to me about my health. And now we're like, I lost 40 pounds. I'm really sick. Like, it's constantly just having to advocate for yourself. And I know that's like, we teach everybody that, but like we have to advocate at such a higher level as both Indigenous and women, because in healthcare and in a lot of things, we are seen as hysterical or overreacting, or even up till recently, there were studies to show that Native Americans felt less pain than white people. Like there are all kinds of crazy things out there. And it's really just about like, the advocating and arguing. It's really almost like disagreeing with people as nicely as you can and sometimes not as nicely as you can to show them like, this is what it is. And I'm going to advocate no matter how offensive and how much your feelings are going to get hurt, right? It really has been, I have to do this because first of all, no one's going to do it for me. Second of all, I have to advocate. Third of all, like even just attending this, I had this feeling like, oh man, I'm representing my whole tribe right now. You know what I mean? So it's like, I feel like I'm not just doing it for me, I guess I'm doing it for all of my other classmates and even some of my classmates who have unfortunately passed in my Native community. I'm doing it for all of them because I don't ever want to be a face of someone who didn't get out, who didn't make something of myself, because at the end of the day, if I am one person who made it out, who can inspire even one more person to advocate and push for whatever they want in their life, then I've done my job as a person.
Thank you, Rihanna. I think, yes, absolutely. One of the strategies, right, for continuing to fight the status quo is to just to persevere. And I think you all, three of you, have demonstrated how you've persevered in achieving your projects, goals and business. It's in education that is, very, very impressive. But it's that piece of like advocating and speaking up and being that person and knowing that sometimes, right, you're going to get something back, but still kind of pushing through it. I want to, one of the other questions that pop up, Nicole, I'm wondering if you would be willing to take it on. I think it's pretty inspiring. It is, you know, what gives you hope for the future around Native and Indigenous people?
What gives me hope from a Native side is all of the acceptance and, at least for me, the outpour of people reaching out to me for these, you know, for what I'm doing. There are just so many. And then when I talk about it with other people, with other Indigenous people, they are all so accepting and yes, we need to do this. And yes, we need, you know, pushing. And I've always had that hope that, and that's what, you know, that's basically the hope I see is that, you know, they also want to have a difference made. And so support is a big thing. For non-natives, I saw hope because I had a few different shows and the number of people who came to me that were non-native to just ask questions and to be so interested in the issues was mind-blowing. And so that gives me hope as well that there is something, you know, at least for what I'm doing, if it's drawing them to ask questions, then I know that it'll give hope for others. And when others see and ask these questions, I'm just thankful that they took the time and the courage to even ask these questions and to want to get to know more. And with that, I see some type of change. And that's what gives me, you know, that push every day is, you know, at least I've changed one person's life and that's all that matters. So that's the hope that I have. And I do hope, I do see there's something that's gonna happen. Something's gonna change.
Nicole, thank you for that. I certainly feel inspired and a renewed strength, and just by sharing the space with the three of you and being able to listen to your stories and learn more about each of you. And so thank you for sharing of yourselves and giving of yourselves in this way to our students, to our faculty and our staff who were able to listen to the table talk today, but also knowing that it's recorded and that we use these as conversation pieces for some of our classes, as well as some of our programming with our students. And so thank you for that. There might be some folks that seek you out and might Google you and find out and reach out to you. And so we definitely know that takes time. And so thank you for that. I want to close for us and just sharing a little bit of some of the things that we are continuing to do here at Cal State Fullerton. Tomorrow, actually, from 11 to 6 p.m. at our Central Quad, if you're anywhere near Cal State Fullerton, we have our Native and Intertribal Indigenous celebration from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. We have, we're doing a land acknowledgement by Kevin Lone Wolf Nunez from the Tongva Indian tribe. We also have some performances from some of our different tribes. And more importantly, for a lot of our students, we have free Indian tacos and fry bread from Hale's Indian Tacos. So if you're anywhere near Cal State Fullerton and around this area, please join us. It's free and open to all. So hopefully folks can join us for that celebration. But I just want to thank each of you for participating in the panel and for being so inspirational to us. And I'm going to hand it off, I think, to Cecil to close us out. So thank you.
Thank you all for joining today's table talk. It was a pleasure to share space with you all and listening to your stories of resiliency. I want to thank our moderator. Thank you, Dr. O, for guiding us through this dialogue. And I want to thank our panelists for being vulnerable and sharing your stories with us today. A shout out to our partners, Allied Engagement, Government External Relations, and the President's Office for helping us pull this off. We will be hosting our next Titan Table Talk on February 22nd at 11:30 to 1 o'clock, and the topic will be resiliency in our Black African American communities. We'll be continuing this dialogue as we come back from winter break. So also don't forget, our Staff Development Center is open now in CP 207, so come and check it out. and mark your calendar this year for our Social Justice Week that will start March 14th. You can find details for all of these events in our winter newsletter. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you all next semester. Take care, everybody. Thanks.